The alt-right.
That is a name for a broad dissident movement, and it is against egalitarianism primarily. It's against egalitarianism in the form of assuming that all cultures are equal, that the sexes are basically equivalent and interchangeable, that all religions are equally beautiful, that all people and all races, all cultures, you can all mix them all together and it doesn't matter, that it's just all wonderful. It's this egalitarian orthodoxy that the alt-right rejects. But one of the things that does unite it is an understanding that race is a real phenomenon, that race is biological, not just some sort of sociological optical illusion, and that it's an important part of individual and group identity. I think that's one of the things that really unites the alt-right. And it also recognizes that whites as a group have legitimate interests just as do every other racial group. Libertarianism, small government, all that may be important, but if we let immigration continue to bring in Muslims and third world people, that the country is going to change in ways that make libertarianism or small government, all of these questions largely irrelevant.
So are there like groups of alt-right who disagree with each other on issues, or are they all in agreement on the same thing?
Oh, there's plenty of disagreement. And I would say probably the largest subject of disagreement is that there are many on the alt-right that think that Jews are a destructive force in the United States. Others are much less inclined to blame Jews for what's going on. That would be one area. Another aspect of disagreement of the alt-right is that there are those who are very, very strongly anti-feminist to the point that the feminists would call them misogynists. Other people are less divided on that question. There are various differences also on foreign policy. By and large, the alt-right is very, very non-interventionist and tends to respect and admire Vladimir Putin and his nationalist approach to putting Russia's interests in front before others. They tend to like that as a model for America first, as Donald Trump was talking during the campaign.
When it comes to the feminists, the Jews, and other, where do you stand on those issues? And Russia?
Well, I am not so ferociously anti-feminist. I don't think that white people or people in general advance their own cause by blaming Jews for things that go wrong. I think we have to look to our own resources. We have to look to our own solutions for things. As far as foreign policy is concerned, I generally do think that the alt-right position on respecting nationalism, respecting sovereignty, respecting leaders that really put the interests of their people first, I certainly agree with that. I know that there are certain pre-war connotations to the term America first, but there should be nothing controversial about a president of the United States saying America first. That should be his job. Yeah. It's the job of the U.S. president to put our interests before those of any other people on earth. Whereas I think both Republicans and Democrats over the last 20 or 30 years, they seem to think of the United States as this country that is sort of, we're here to serve the world. We're here to spread democracy. We're here to spread gay rights. And we're here to welcome all these people who come from failed societies. And we have an infinite capacity to bring them here and turn them into good little Americans. Both Democrats and Republicans have had this view. And so it's refreshing to have a president who realizes that Americans are a distinct people. And not everybody's necessarily going to fit in. Yeah. That's a radical position to take in contemporary America.
I find it interesting, and I've been fighting with black people over the years about this, but I find it interesting that groups get together, or segments of groups get together, and they blame other groups for their failures in life, where in America, you learn from others, but you can also take control of your own life. And, I mean, you got to have challenges, of course, but you can pretty much do what you want. And it seemed a waste of time to just build up all this anger against other groups.
I think that is one of the things that most holds black people back in the United States. This conviction that Whitey is out there rubbing his hands, trying to think, how am I going to put black people down today? Yeah. White people just don't think in those terms. But the idea of saying to black people, the reason that you are poor or more likely to be in jail, it's because of those white people over there, those teachers, those police officers, those librarians, those mayors, those congressmen. They're all trying to do you in. That's a terrible message to send to black people. And I think that if we as a country had as one of our objectives to make black people hate white people, that'd be the best way to do it. Yeah. Tell black people constantly, it's those horrible people over there, past and present, who are responsible for everything that's ever gone wrong for you and will go wrong for you tomorrow. And yet, white people love to wallow in that message. So many white people love to feel good about themselves by talking about how bad white people are. It's a kind of a sickness. Yeah. And of course, it feeds the same kind of sickness that many blacks have, that nothing that they do is really their fault. It's all the man who did it to me. It's a sickness that grows on each other. It's a mutual kind of insanity.
Jared, I was saying just before the break that I see younger white Americans, especially men, I don't know if the women are doing it, who are angry at the Jews for something that happened a long time ago. And the anger, there's nothing wrong with learning history, but the anger is what's going to weaken you, as it's done for black people. You can deal with life without being angry about it. As a matter of fact, you see clearer how to deal with it. But you were saying that anger is good.
No, I don't think I don't think it's good. Sometimes it's understandable. Sometimes there are explanations for it. For example, young white men, they have, at first I was very disdainful of the kind of vituperation that they express. But I've come to understand it a little bit better, because all of their lives they're told that white men are basically the cancer of history. Yeah. That it's their fault, that everything that's ever gone wrong for Hispanics, for women, for blacks, for homosexuals, colonialism, slavery, lynching, it's all to blame. They're all to blame for all of that. That nothing white people have ever done is any good, and for white people to have any pride in their history or heritage is an expression of hatred. Really, they have pretty much been told that right from the get-go. I agree. And once they realize that, well, this isn't really, that they should not be blamed for this, many of them are quite angry about a system that places the blame for everything that's gone wrong in history on their shoulders. There's a certain bitterness about that. And so I understand that, but I agree 100% with you that being motivated by anger can blind you to the realities of things. Anger can blind you to the sometimes legitimate points of views that others have. So I'm trying to understand this anger, and I think that's really at the base of it, being told right practically from kindergarten on that they have privileges that are unearned, that they just basically oppress other people by breathing the air. This stuff really makes a lot of young men hopping mad, and it is primarily a young man's experience, but some women are reacting in the same way too. Yeah.
Are you a white nationalist?
I don't use that term. I consider myself a white advocate. By that I mean that whites do have legitimate interests, and that it is perfectly legitimate and moral to advocate in the interests of whites. I think, for example, that whites have the right to remain a majority in the United States. We had an immigration policy until 1965 that was designed to keep the country majority white. So it was mostly whites and blacks. I think adding in this new mix of Hispanics, adding in Asians, adding in people from all around the world, Muslims, why do we really need Muslims in the United States? The idea is that we cannot discriminate against Muslims because discrimination of any kind is bad. Yeah. But I really do not think that Muslims bring anything to the United States but trouble. But to say so gets you pegged as some sort of absolute hater and beyond the pale.
What's wrong with being a white nationalist?
There's nothing wrong with it. The word nationalist to me has a kind of, Basque nationalists or Kurdish nationalists. It has a kind of a bomb-throwing hue to it that I prefer to avoid. But the idea of whites wishing to remain a majority in a nation of their own, I think that's entirely legitimate. The French, for example, why is it wrong to say France should be for the French? Why is it wrong for Hungarians, for example, who are causing a big stink in the European Union? Why is it wrong for them to say, well, now, wait a minute, we really don't want to become a multicultural country. We don't want to admit these Africans and Middle Easterners who are swarming into Europe. We just don't want them here. Yeah. I think that's perfectly legitimate. And when you think about, you could ask the Chinese to admit Syrians. You could ask the Japanese to admit Syrians. We wouldn't even think of it because we know they'd turn us down flat. And yet it's only basically European or European origin countries that we expect to open themselves up to that kind of generosity to others who are going to change their society. We would never ask the Nigerians to admit Syrians. We would never ask the Venezuelans, for example, to admit large numbers of Syrian refugees. It's only white countries that we expect to do this, and we consider them somehow wrong if they don't want to.
I notice that when people get into a group, they don't tend to stand for good. Am I seeing this in the wrong way?
I think that it is possible to stand up for your people in a good and healthy way. I think that it is normal for people to think tribally, if you will. I think there's a very significant statistic about life in the United States, and that is that 95% of the church congregations are at least 85% one race, and many church congregations are 100% one race. What this suggests is that when people are completely free to choose, and nobody, the government's, that's the one institution that the government has not tried to integrate is church congregations. And when people are completely free to choose, they express a preference for worshiping and I think also living and working and socializing with people of the same race. I think that's part of our deep human nature. And if we accepted that and tried to build our country on an assumption that that's just the way we are, rather than trying to change human nature, we would be much, much better off.